I, Ritisha, welcome you all to this episode of the Xoxoday webinar series. I take this opportunity to introduce the speaker for today's webinar, Mr. Manoj Biswas, CEO and founder of a healthcare startup, Salvio Healthcare Solutions. He is the former CHRO L&T Infotech, former Asia Pacific and India CHRO Accenture, ex-IBM, Wipro, and an ex-Army officer. He is a passionate speaker and coach and tries to find time to share his experiences to build a better tomorrow at numerous platforms in the country and abroad. He has won numerous accolades including the CNBC's Innovative CHRO of the Year Award 2016-17, Economics Times Transformational Leader of the Year 2015-16, Dun & Bradstreet HR Par Leader for 2015. We are honored to host him today. Today's webinar is on human resources in the digital era. During the webinar, Manoj will discuss upon the importance of VUCA world, predictions of digital disruption and its impact on human resources, core principles and effective implementation of an HR digital strategy, and easy to adopt and innovating HR practices. The duration of the webinar is 30 minutes, followed by a 15-minute of Q&A session. Please share your questions through the chat box during the Q&A round, and Manoj will be happy to answer them. Over to you, Mr. Manoj.
Thanks for the introduction. Human resources have become more pertinent and important, specifically in the digital area. This is post the digital era. I think this is one topic which has become very, very close and gets discussed very frequently as to what will be the new look of the human resources function. What will it do? What should the strategy be like? What are some of the best practices? What are some of the other companies doing? In this webinar, I intend to share some of my experiences, not only with the organizations that I've worked with, but the organizations I've learned from either through my various assignments or through various speaking opportunities that I have been able to connect with. So there will be, for the first 30 minutes, I'll take you through this construct, and then we will open this out for question answers, and I would want to listen and learn more from you, which probably would become the next edition of this presentation. So today, I think as we start this, I wanted to talk about, this is a slide which is very, very important, specifically for millennials like me. Back to Future was probably the first English movie that we saw during our times as youngsters growing up, which gave an insight to how technology would change the way life is. So I wanted to use that synonym here and use the movie Connect here to talk about how we're going to talk about digitization. I remember I was speaking in a forum about not long ago, maybe 7, 8 years, 10 years, maybe at most. And one of the speakers in that panel of ours stood up and said, "Look, can you imagine the world tomorrow where your mobile phone will be the only digital device that you would require?" And those were the early days where you had an iPhone or an MP3 player for your music. You had those early Nokia phones, if you remember, for your phones. And then you had digital cameras for your camera, and you had a laptop, a desktop, etc. that you would use. So you had a multitude of digital devices that ran your life, professionally or personally. And then here was one person in the panel saying that very soon your mobile phone would probably be the only digital device that you would require. And I looked at that, at my Nokia phone, and I thought, no, I don't think in the near future that's going to happen. And lo and behold, 5 years from there, probably that's something which is true. The what it gave me is an insight to say it is not that technology and disruption will continue to surprise us. It is the velocity of change and the speed at which these changes are going to happen is what's going to surprise and make paradigm shifts and changes. So with that context, let me move on to talk about a little bit about the VUCA world. I don't know how many of you have observed this, but that VUCA world is actually something that was coined by the US Armed Forces. This is a term which comes from the Armed Forces. It is something which is discussed as we do strategic planning in the Armed Forces. So this has been in vogue for a long time than we think. I know we have been using this in the corporate context for maybe a couple of years. But this has been an army lingo for a long time. I'm sure all of you understand what VUCA stands for. It's about how the world is changing. It's becoming more and more volatile and unpredictable and uncertain. And in this, we are going to talk about some of the predictions of digital disruptions first. Now, please bear in mind that this is a study that we did about a couple of years back, but the whole aim was to see just in about a year and a half, how much change would we experience in and around us. So some of this data that I'm going to share with you is probably already happening because we are making projections. We are making projections sitting end of 2016 for 2018. We're trying to make a projection just about a year and a half down the line. So let's begin. By 2018, 40% of the outsourced services will leverage smart machine technologies, rendering the offshore model obsolete for competitive advantage. Now, this is something that we said or we researched about a year and a half back. And if you look at the context today, it is so very true that because of artificial intelligence, some of the repetitive work, some of the work that was getting outsourced to countries like Philippines, India, etc., is slowly going off and is being replaced. By 2018, more than $500 billion of equity value will be created by leveraging virtual talent to drive logarithmic business models. Now that's the context of some of the projections that we are making. Now let's go to the next one, which is by 2018, about 6 billion connected things will be requesting support. So what does it do in that context? The IT leaders will start viewing things as customer of service. So from the context, if you go back a decade, customer service was about servicing customers, human beings. So the human interface was very, very important. You concentrated on your accent, on your language training, on your skills, on your understanding of the product or service, etc. But here now, IT leaders have to start viewing these things as customer of services and then learn to market them and satisfy their non-human request. Let me give you a very simple example of what does this mean. How does IoT change life? I don't know how many of you know that the simple coffee mug that you pick up from your cafe coffee day machines and you have it every time. The CCD machine is actually an IoT device which sends data and statistics on usage, on which days of the week the pattern, what consumption is high. So what does it do? It actually enables CCD to manage their warehousing very effectively. So they cut down on the warehousing cost, the warehousing wastage, and warehousing for CCD would save them if they shifted about 1%, less wastage. It would actually give them a saving of anywhere between 100 to 120 odd crores. So that's a very simple example of how some of these things are changing the context of business. By 2018, the next data point talks about 20% of all business content will be authored by machines. So for the CIO, it's about identifying opportunities to adopt automated content generation services. The near-term flag for recruiters is next year, watch out for hiring freeze on copywriters in favor of robo-writing solutions. I'm sure some of these things are very commonplace now. You've got used to interacting with bots on various sites who interact with you. There are a lot of content which is being managed in the publishing industry and the writing industry, and the copywriters are being replaced and looked at by AI solutions. Now, in this context of this change, what happens? We believe that a codependent relationship can be beneficial. But how much do we afford to give? Because 1 million of new IoT devices will be purchased every hour of every day by 2021. So that's the context of how new things, new devices, new intelligent machines are connecting to this entire landscape. By 2018, 15% of the fastest growing companies will have fewer employees than instances of smart machines. This is, I'm sure, as HR leaders and HR professionals, specifically people who are working in either smart companies, startups, or working with some of the other multinationals, are observing this and seeing this. Gone are the days when we used to talk about hiring more and companies were measured by how many people you have. Now I think it's about how smart you are. It's not about the numbers or the headcount growth that people would look at. So there is an impact to all of that in the ecosystem. For the IT leaders, it's about to establish a role of governance and the management of a hybrid ecosystem which consists of employees and smart machines. For the CIO, it's about to promote the use of smart machine technology so that there's a higher leverage to supplement to hiring of people. And for HR, it's about managing people differently. And I will talk a little bit more about the HR context because that's something which is relevant for us. HR predominantly, if you go back, specifically who have been working in this industry for a decade or so, HR predominantly has gone its own evolution from being personal managers to evolve to a business partner. And if you look at, HR has always been about standardization, standardized processes, make it more effective, make it more robust, giving solutions which are very, 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 it's kind of across the organization. Whenever you come up with a compensation policy, whenever you come up with a benefit program, whenever you come up with an engagement program, whatever you come up with, it's about people. And you think that everybody who's working in your organization are standard type of people who require standard motivators, standard engagement levers, etc. Now figure this out, and I will talk about some of these trends a little later also. That you have a growing workforce, which is going to be contingent workforce, and then you have your regular workforce, which is what we are calling as our regular employees, and then you have a digital workforce which is growing. So HR, which was primarily thinking about standards, about one organization or one size fit all kind of practices or policies, now has to think about at least 3 different categories of people, and we will talk about subcategories a little later, but 3 different broad categories of employees that you will have to manage. So everything that you thought about or learned about, managing people in a standard fashion is out of the window. And this one is a very interesting one. By 2018, more than 3 million workers globally will be supervised by a robo-boss. The IT leaders will train managers to focus on human issues such as creative leadership, work relations, strategic planning. But there would be, and today, for example, people who are in the BPO industry would understand that there are lots of robo-bosses that are managing quality control, supervising things, doing an audit of quality of work that is being done by your customer service agents, etc. So this is a phenomena which we never thought we will see so soon. But this is something which is making inroads into the organization. Specifically, like I said, the IT industry, the retail industry, some of the smart industries are first to experience this, but this is a trend which will quickly catch up in the other segments too. Now, as we go through this transformation, HR has to think about what exactly the business leaders are saying. And this was a survey which was done about a year back. Business leaders, and I'm sure some of the things will resonate with you. Business leaders are worried. About 87% said they believe digital will disrupt their industry. That's a no-brainer. About 87% of the respondents, business leaders, said digitization, and that is something that's going to change and disrupt the way their industry is functioning. About 6 times the leaders are not getting their digital skills. 6x more likely to leave their organization within the next year. So there's a huge demand for a different kind of talent, and unfortunately or fortunately, that talent is in either short supply or needs to get that talent renovation needs to happen in a very, very, very fast pace. 87% don't have the right leaders. 87% feel that they don't have the right leaders who will take them through this change management journey. 70% need a whole new talent supply. So they are talking about being able to compete with this change paradigm, the kind of talent they used to hire in the past versus what they need. 70% actually felt that they need a whole new kind of a talent supply now. So 92% of the organizations are not correctly structured to operate in this new environment. Now that's something which is, so these are some of the paradigm shifts that are worrying the leaders of today. Now, as business gets worried, what's the impact on HR? And I know there are various conversations which are happening about how HR will change, how HR will no longer be required, or there will be no HR teams in organizations, etc., etc. There are various views of how various opinions that are being floated. Now, what we have experienced and what I feel is that there will be an impact on HR. Yes. Now, why are some of these impacts happening? Let's observe first that. Never ever in an organization, HR had to deal with so many informed stakeholders. Everybody is an informed stakeholder today. There's a multiplicity of stakeholders, social structures that are individuals. Your employees are, more informed stakeholders today. The various NGOs who are, working for various parts of things, wanting to ensure that there are things which are happening within your organization. There are multiplicity of stakeholders, coming from your leaders, from your teams, etc., etc. The government, which is changing, and there's an ever-changing demand. So there is a multiplicity of stakeholders that are changing the game for you. And then, of course, we talked about this new workforce. The new workforce, which is a combination of multi-generational, always on the move and mobile workforce, multicultural. We talked briefly about the artificial intelligence or robotics, which is getting into the workforce. And then, of course, millennials. I don't know how many of you are aware. Today, there are about 4 generations which are working which form part of your workforce. And then there's the 5th generation, which is kind of coming in. The multiplicity of the workforce, the multi-generational needs of the workforce will force HR to think differently about, one standard practice. It will think about very individual driven, and I'm sure some of you who are actually front-ending with employees or front-ending with some of the businesses are seeing that how employees, businesses are becoming more and more unique in their needs and demands of how they need to be managed. I'm sure this is a story that you will hear to say, hey, we are different. That's a commonplace thing. You're hearing this, that to say we are different. But how do we handle the difference is a question that's going to bother some of us, and that's the new paradigm shift. Always on the move and mobile workforce. There is a large scale increase in the contingent workforce. There's a high degree, and specifically in the industry that I have entered now, the startup industry will tell you that there's a high increase, and we will see that our mobile workforce will almost be about anywhere between 50% to 70%, depending on industry. And that's the trend. That's the new normal that we will see. People want to work for a particular project. People want to work from a particular location. People are not people choose what kind of work they want to do, and skills could be anywhere. So we have to balance that out. Say, how do we balance our organization to deal with this fluidity? Multicultural is a no-brainer that we are understanding. Today I think organizations are becoming more and more local in nature, where you have local workforce as well as some of the global structural changes to deal with. I will not dwell too much on the robotics piece, because we've talked about how artificial intelligence is becoming a larger piece of workforces to look at. And then of course millennials. That will become, that in some of the younger industries, it's already about 70-75% of the workforce. It will soon become about 80-85% of the workforce. And then of course you will have managers who will have to manage this workforce very, very differently, because how their drivers of how they work is very, very different. So here is the new kind of workforce, where man, woman, and of course machine are collaborating, and this will be the new workforce, or the new normal of tomorrow. Now, as we go to the workforce impact, and some of these things I've already talked about, but here are some of the highlights. That millennials today are about 60 to 75% of their workforce. It will actually move towards 75 and 80% or 90% in some of the other smart industry. Germany, Japan, and even China and the US will actually have a negative population growth. So as they get to this, the workforce dynamics will change in some of these geographies. The rise of the contingent workforce. About 45% of the workforce in the US today is contingent workforce, and it's rising by almost a percentage each year. And this movement is going to be much more rapid in Asia Pacific and India, because that's where the workforce mix that we are using or the work that's happening is very high. The choices and expectation of the millennials are changing the workforce dynamics. We talked briefly about it as to how their needs, how their drivers are very, very different today. And if they become 90% of the workforce that you manage, then obviously you will have to think about something needs very, very differently. Now, the question that I keep on asking, and I was speaking at one of the Asia Pac HR Congress meetings in the Philippines, and I was talking to the HR leaders there to say, do you have a digital HR strategy? And I was very surprised that none of them actually they put up their hands, and this was just about maybe 8 months back. And I'm sure that story is not too different when it comes to India. While people say that they have some kind of a digital strategy for the organization, which is true, but it is more business focused. And we observed in the previous slides that some of these things are changing very dynamically for HR. And it's very surprising that some of us in the organization have still not moved our strategy or not thinking about an HR digital strategy. So the question that quickly gets asked to me to say, okay, if we want to do an HR digital strategy, what are some of the things that we need to do? While I believe that a strategy like any other is very different from an organization to another organization. It depends on what kind of a growth pattern you are in, what's your business strategy, what is your business, what is the line of business that you are into. But here are some of the core principles that I wanted to share with you as HR members, team members, leaders, professionals, as you focus to build on a digital strategy for HR. 3 core principles: make it very simple, Simplicity should be the core of it. Transparency, and make it very, very cool. When I say simplicity, it would mean right fit for the organization. It cannot be that your organization is at a different phase of the curve of growth and you get a great strategy in place. It has to be right fit for the organization. I always believe, as I move organizations, as I've moved through various organizations, I've always believed that whatever has been successful in one part of the organization, in my previous organization, I should not repeat it the same way in the current organization. Just for the simple reason that the current organization has different dynamics. It would be at a different context of growth. And whatever has been successful somewhere, it is not necessary that without changing the context, it will be successful here again. Look at simpler solutions rather than large complex ones. I'm a big propagator of simplicity. And I believe that the core principle when you do a new strategy has to be much more simpler solutions rather than complex ones, is because the complex ones, the change management that will be required in the organization would be very, very huge. While the simpler ones are easier to impact, they are more modular in approach. And that's my next point. Take a modular approach. They're modular approach that you kind of plug and play like SAP, and then you have the entire piece together. While you are clear of what you want to do as a digital strategy for the organization in totality, but I would always propagate and suggest take a simpler approach, take a modular approach once, because the complexity of things can bog down the teams, the organization, etc. The simpler solution, modular approach gives you simpler things to kind of fit in the first. You can actually invent some of them, borrow them, and then fit them together. And there would be limited success at each milestone in shorter span that the organization would see, and hence the buy-in for creating a larger change becomes much more simpler. Transparency. Your employees, whether you believe it or not, since we are talking about 70%, 75% millennials, your employees actually like this. They like that they are part of it. They like that it is transparent. It's open. So think big, but let's not resolve everything immediately. One of the things that you could look at is to use crowdsourcing or any other methods to make sure that they are involved as part of this change, and make it cool. Again, your employees would participate more actively if it is cool. It will help break some of these barriers, and it would be much more easy for you to implement this in the organization. Now, what are some of the steps to implement your digital strategy? First, you have to look at your team structure, composition, and skills. More than once, I've seen that whenever you do a change management and you form a team in an organization to do change management or an innovation drive or something, you tend to create teams of similar people. While they may be in different parts of the business, but they are very similar. They are, for example, if you select all analytically minded people, you would tend to create a team structure which is actually not very conducive for this kind of program. So be very, very focused that you have an evenly distributed team structure in terms of composition and skills. Create an innovation culture. When you are talking about innovation is not about that you classify somebody to be chief innovation officer and you put a timeline to say, hey, this week between this time to this time we will sit in this cool place and innovate. No, it doesn't happen. Innovation is a culture that needs to be there in the organization, and make sure that your management believes that innovation is important for them. And that's how you kind of start the first baby step to create an innovation culture. Always have a technology roadmap. Don't buy technology or don't build technology just for the heck of it, because building technology is going to be a time-consuming process, and if you don't have a roadmap in place, you may end up building something which is redundant by the time you come to the implementation phase of it. And create a euphoria in the organization. Always create a program around it, create a euphoria, involve people, make sure that there is there is a lot of buy-in, a lot of participation, a euphoria in the organization to say, yes, we are preparing ourselves to get to the new tomorrow. The other question, which is very important, is what should I digitize? What should get into this digital strategy? Here are some of the important components that I have listed. I'm sure there are other learnings that will come from in the Q&A session that some of you have done. This is a list. This is not an exhaustive list. Make sure what makes fit for it from your organization perspective. The first pillar that I look at is the talent supply chain or talent strategy. This is something which is very, very important. As you heard that talent is going to be the next big determiner, lever of change for all the organization. This is something which is very, very focused on, and when you build your strategy around what should I digitize, I think that's the first lever that you should look at. The second piece is around learning and development. The way we are learning, the way we are used to learning, I think that is a construct that needs to change, and that is something that we need to kind of watch for. And then the other piece is around standardization to differentiated process. We talked about how HR has been talking about standardized processes, creating uniform processes for everybody. We have to look at to move to differentiated process, and that's something that you need to digitize because it will be easier to control. Simplify and make unhappy processes happy. This is something which is very, very close to what we did. And some of you who are HR practitioners would understand this. For example, let me give you, this is something that when we learned, when I was working with Accenture, we across APAC, we had about 150,000 plus employees. And if you look at, the most complex process that all of our HR people were using or consuming their time was on performance management. It took about 3.5 months to do performance management preparation, then the actual implementation, analysis of the data, doing the meetings and reviews, then sharing with the employees, uploading of data, downloading of data, queries and clarification, etc., etc., etc. And it was the most complex process to that probably most of the HR people kind of run. And unfortunately or fortunately, that's also one of the most unhappy processes. So you have to, I know some of the examples where when we surveyed this, Accenture decided to do away with the bell curve and move out of the unhappy process of how we do performance management. There is a different way of how performance management are done. In few other organizations, they have done away with multiplicity of how performance management is doing. It doesn't make sense to run the most complex and the most elaborate process of performance management that HR does, and yet it's the most unhappy process. Crowdsource, we talked about it. Get a laundry list, crowdsource, use other methodology, hear from the ranks as to what exactly is happening in the organization. What does your organization needs to change or digitize, and hence look at the laundry list and then prioritize the laundry list. And of course, deliver your employee value proposition in a much more digitized way. Some of the things I think when I was working with L&T, what we did was one of the employee value proposition was about how we wanted to make rewards real time. So we collaborated with Xoxoday to put a platform in place so that real-time appreciation of employees could happen. So this is just one example how you deliver your employees real-time. The value proposition, is about delivering the value to the employees in real time. But of course, as you do this, do not forget your communication plan. That's something which is very, very important. That is what will help you create the euphoria in the organization. That is something that will help you create the participation that you expect from the employees in the organization. Now, as we do this, we'll talk a few of the innovative HR practices. I will share some of them that I have come across, and from my previous organization or from the organization that I have touched base with, and I would love to hear some of the stuff that you are doing. For example, in Accenture, we used to do workforce planning and workforce management was becoming one critical thing for us, because you had a huge workforce that had to move across organization. Now that was becoming something which was very, 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 very difficult. So we moved to something called as intelligent workforce planning and intelligent TSC, or talent supply chain. Now that is something which where we put a middle layer on all the various kinds of various kinds of platforms, or various kinds of analytic devices, or analytic not only analytics but different systems that were getting used by various businesses as various part of the organizations to do this. So we combined everything together, and we would know real time as to what's the skill change that is happening. We would know what is changing. So what exactly is intelligent TSC? Intelligent TSC is very simple. Imagine of how retail is managed by Amazon. It's the Amazonian way of managing your talent supply chain. So imagine this, that you understand how your warehouse in Amazon is getting updated real time, and whenever a customer logs in, he or she knows that this is the timeline that he or she will get this resource, this is what it will cost, and this is the timeline that he'll get it, and you have a 99% customer satisfaction rate on delivery cost, etc. So I think that is something which is very, very important for us to look at. We talked about how we made rewards and recognition and engagement of employees, made it very real time. That was something which is one of the best practices. There are also various companies who are using best practices of simulation or gamification into learning. Learning has become more on the go. Virtual learning centers are coming up. In L&T we implemented something called as the Mosaic learning system. So Mosaic was about, you never get into bench. There was always a concept, and some of you who are from the IT industry will understand this better. There was always a concept of bench. We moved away people from bench. It was always about Mosaic. It was about, whenever you're getting free from a project, you have to find what's the next skill that you want to develop. And it is up to you to get into the Mosaic Academy and get yourself trained in that skill and go and apply, because every job was open that existed in the organization was open, and you get yourself apply and get selected. So the entire process of deploying somebody, taking somebody off was changing and becoming digitized. So these are a few examples of best practices. I also saw one of the best practices that I kind of tried to implement in a way in performance management in my previous organization was about performance management. We talked a little bit about it. Performance management in my previous organization was very simple. It was just two buttons that we created on an app which said give feedback and take feedback. So an employee could take feedback from previous project manager that he or she has worked with, and the project manager vice versa could give a feedback, and all of this would get into the back end where the analytics would be done, and in real time a people manager of the org would know what was the stack ranking of the employees. So it was a real time performance management. It took away the pain of doing performance management annually or biannually, etc. There are other innovative HR practices which are happening. I'm sure some of you are using learning innovations which are in terms of MOOC, which is massive open online courses or simulated gamification e-learning processes that are happening. Compensation adjustments which are based on what's the maximum impact that you're making. So there's a skill level and there's a variable level which is based on the transaction HR activities are going away and actually getting digitized. So those are some of the things that are happening. These are other few examples that I wanted to share with you on what's happening globally on employee engagement, gamification that is being used for training of people in various walks of the business, etc. And of course, this is not what it ends here. There are many more possibilities. There are many things that can be done. Automatically identifying talent gaps, determining how best to choose them, variable compensation compensation fixation using reverse option methods. Employees to define their own compensation. So that's how that's some of the examples of possibilities in the future that people are moving towards promotions based on a person's digital work trail rather than a physical one that we do today. So the future actually is now. It's all about people. So hence my request to all of you in HR is about reinventing HR, recreating possibilities, think more, think what works for the organization and not fearing to experiment. So that with that, I come to the end of my presentation and the talk, and I think I'm kind of on the time, and I'm open to now take questions.
Thank you, sir. We'll now begin with our Q&A session. The chat option is now available. I urge you all to make the most of this opportunity. Share your questions through the chat option and get them answered in a minute.
Okay, I have the first question from Indujita. Do you feel that all the digital automation HR function will lose its importance? No, I don't think that the HR function will lose its importance. I think the HR function needs to gear itself to go up the value chain. What I mean is that the HR function actually will gain more importance, because as the automation happens, in the past HR has been about managing large volumes of people, doing things which are very very process oriented, stepwise, more operational in nature. It's about actually moving to become more strategic, more skill based, more digitized version or strategic version of HR. I think that's the evolution of HR that's going to happen. The HR in function currently, as we know, that's something is going to change. What about the next question that I have from Geeta is, what about smaller organization where people are limited, no big change can be introduced in terms of digitalization? Actually, Geeta, I feel in smaller organization, my organization that I currently work with is a very small one. In smaller organization, simpler organization, actually there is more scope for doing or fitting a culture of innovation and change, because it's much more easier to implement. You can actually get the buy-in very quickly. Dhruv says AI will cut down numerous job function. Is it going to add new ones too? Yeah, Dhruv, as I said, it's going to add new ones. The human skills of at this point in time, when the organization moves towards more AI and artificial intelligence and digitization, I think the human part of it is something which is going to be more important. There'll be more focus on how we respond to various things, how we make sure that the employees are reskilling themselves at much more agility and speed. HR function, for example, has to understand business a lot more than it had to in the past. So there will be a lot of focus on that context going forward. Okay, I had another question from Nasreen. Her question is, what are the capabilities that are required to drive innovation needed to meet the strategic objective of the digital space? I think one of the major things that Nasreen, we talked about is, as an HR person, first you have to understand the business. What circle are you at? You have to move and influence the business to say these are some of the things that are changing. And the big change management is to look inward and say whether you have the requisite skill or whether your teams have the requisite skill to deal with some of these changes that we are talking about. If that happens, then of course that's the first step done. And then of course we looked at those 4 or 5 levers of what needs to change. What do you change first? Look at what is needed in your organization. Is talent supply a big thing? Is learning a big thing? Is XYZ a big thing? What are some of the processes that needs to change? And that's how you change things. Create a very small core team of different people, and that should be the team which will help drive a culture, the entire project, and the HR transformation. Okay, the next question that I have from Benny is, how can HR determine proper span of control that allows for effective, lean and scalable digital outcomes? In fact, span of control is something which probably is something that we talked about in the past. HR has to move away from some of these questions of pyramids and span of control. Not that they are not required, but we have to get into an environment which is very, very flexible on some of these levers of span of controls and pyramids. Like I said, there are going to be different kinds of workforces. There are going to be contingent workforces who are going to be there for a few months in your organization, do the project and move on. And there are going to be very few people who will be your fixed workforces. So as you look at that construct, you will have to look at something like a permeable workforce, more like teams which come together for a project and then move on. I think that's how we have to look at the new org structure in the future. Murli, how will the digital plan operate, monitor, and track value captured? Well, all of these things, good part of this is that all of these things will have a number to it. The value will be captured by the numbers that you will drive. Just let me give you a very simple example. Now let's say you will change performance management, or you will change. Let me take a very simple thing. Let's say you will make talent supply chain real time. Now, what we have seen, and specifically these are statistics that we observe, if you make a 1% saving in a talent supply chain workforce of about 1 lakh people, if I make 1% of change, that drives a revenue saving to the company by roughly close to about $10 million. Now that's the number. So similarly, that's why I said you have to start with understanding your business levers first. So if you understand the business, you will be able to say what are some of the things that are much more critical for the business, and that's the one that you will kind of drive for, and that's how you'll be able to determine and put a number working with the team to say what exactly you will achieve at the end of the day. Garima Gupta had a question: what are the must tools that every HR should be expert on? I think whatever tools I prescribe today will get outdated tomorrow. I think what HR has to be an expert on is concept, construct, and be very, very open to learning new things. So there are a lot of new tools that you have to learn to, but overall, I think you have to be much more analytical. You have to be much more business focused rather than what we have been. You have to move away from, in totality move away from operations, but move away a little bit from the operations and try to think like a true business partner. Your construct of whatever you will do has to be much more strategic in the organization. Those are some of the skills and tools that will help you to enable what works best for you in the organization. If I stand today and say, hey, this is something which is important. Let me give an example. If I say maybe, SAP is important, or that tool is important, but that may or may not be relevant for your organization. Somebody asked a question about smaller organization. That kind of a tool may or may not be required for that organization. So I think that's something which is very, very important from that construct. Okay, I have the next question to say from Sandeep, to say many organizations are not seeing the value in digitization of HR function and are quite focused on business deliverables. See, I think, Sandeep, that's what I said. You have all HR managers or HR leaders have to start with the business, have to be much more of a business focused function. You have to speak, you have to understand your business first. Because if you do not understand that, whatever language you speak will not be understood by the business. Let me give you a simple example. If you tell your business leader of tomorrow to say, hey, your talent supply chain needs to be digitized. I will spend 10 crores or whatever, 10 crores on this, and we will take about 8 months for this program to be launched. And in 8 months, every year, you will see a 10 million, value ROI that you will see once. And here is how you will see it. Now, I'm sure that's a language that any business leader will start understanding. Unfortunately, the language that most of us as HR professionals speak is alien to the business, because we talk about very soft values while the business rightfully understands the hard numbers. How will digitization impact on employee relations? Of course, Monica, thanks for the question. Employee relations, is at the crux of it. That's why if you looked at, things that we talked about for digitization is very, very pertinent to your organization. I said, you could use tools like crowdsourcing, learning from the ground, learning from your employees as to what will work, and then of course involve them, in L&T, for example, we created a work group called the Catalyst. The Catalyst was a group of people from the business, from employees, who actually work towards what are some of the things that we need to change as we are, what should get digitized, what should change, what should we throw out. And unfortunately, as HR people, we are very, very possessive about some of our processes. At the moment somebody says questions that, or somebody says, hey, we need to throw that out of the window and change it, we get defensive. I think we need to get out on space and look at how things are getting relevant or irrelevant. Otherwise, it will be a great Kodak moment for HR in our organizations. Hi Rajat, I see your question. Nice to see you on this webinar. Yeah, Rajat has a question that while HR is moving toward digitization, analytics and disruption in HR, what would you advise new HR professionals to learn to be able to do good in this area? Rajat, I think this is something that I've been propagating, and Rajat is incidentally part of my team which we experimented with LTI. So when I moved into LTI, the first thing that I did was that this needs to change, and it cannot be inward out kind of a change. It needs to be an outward in kind of a change. So what I did was I actually went to some of the business schools and hired fresh talent from these universities. So Rajat, I think, came from Excel. There were other people who came from other TIS and other business schools. And we took a group of 5 or 6 people who were just fresh out of the MBS colleges and created a core team which looked at this construct, and they managed this transformation and change from for us. And this team of fresh team that we had got reported directly to the CHR, and they worked with me for about a year to rephrase and make some of these big digital changes and disruptive changes that we created in a company like L&T, which was still an old gen kind of company. So Rajat, I think those are the things that we need to do. As an HR professional, you have to be very business focused. As an HR professional, you have to be very, very open to that. Your processes, your good thing that you have created is redundant today, so you have to throw them away or change it. You have to be open to new ideas. I think that's something that HR is, it's more of I think there needs to be more of a mindset change and a cultural change in HR as teams. If we don't do that, then somebody asked the question to say, will HR lose importance? Yes, it will. If we are more flexible, if we are more intelligent, if we are much more fungible in what is required for the future, then of course, HR is here to stay in a new avatar. Anuja has a question: how can organization win the digital war? Well, I think organizations are already winning the digital war. It's all about imbibing new technology. It's all about doing new things the way, much more smarter. And I think most of the organizations are imbibing it. It's about how HR will align and make the organization speed up and win this digital war, not only externally in the marketplace, but also internally. Please understand, there's a larger internal heart of the organization is actually internal. And then while the business is very focused outward, as somebody rightly said, to get more businesses, to get more numbers, and to make sure that the business is winning the war with its competition landscape. I think HR has the ownership to keep the heart and center in place and make that work in sync with the organization. Audrey had a question. How can an HR upskill employees in understanding the cultural shift that is happening? I think it's the first thing that HR has to do is move the shift of upskilling, the responsibility of upskilling to the employees rather than with HR. And let me explain this one second, because that's again the old norm of everybody will go into the classroom, everybody will take it to skills, everybody needs to get skill, and some by doing some of these actions, suddenly it has become an HR's responsibility to train people. The whole cultural shift is that it's no longer HR's responsibility. HR will create the environment where somebody has to learn, somebody has to grow, and somebody has to get a job and develop. I think creating that environment is HR's responsibility. Whether it is through Mosaic Academy example that I gave, or whether it is through any other digital means, or whether it is through normal means, basically accessing or having access to real-time, good quality training is something that is that environment HR needs to create. Whether the employee loves it, whether the employee upskills it, creating that environment to say, hey, it is your responsibility is HR's responsibility. Prasanna, how can an HR integrate the right people into a dynamic organizational context and help existing employees and leaders to get moving? I think like I said, whenever you drive transformation, it's about a culture change. So it has to be by having the first conversation with your leaders. Take up what is required. Make sure that there is enough data to validate what you are saying. Make sure that it is simple and in a language that the business leader will understand. Walk up to your business leader and say how important it is to change some of these constructs. Otherwise, it is not that HR needs to do it. It is something which is pertinent for the business. These are some of the revenue benefits that this will translate into. And then make sure that you have the right construct of people who will drive this change along with you. If you do that, I think that's how the HR transformation drive or the HR transformation project will successfully work for your organization. Saujanya, how is the role of HR as that of a digital leader? I think, Saujanya, like I said in my pre-presentation, HR has to be much more fungible and see itself as a leader which is much more consultative and a much more strategic leader rather than an operational leader. Operational leader is about, I've understood, I'll get it done. This is what has happened, so I will change this. It is more than if you try to be that kind of a leader, then obviously you get treated like that. The role of HR leader now is to be much more consultative and much more strategic. Both these elements are very important, and as you transform yourself from the current high volume, high intensive operational HR leader to be the leader of a digital HR leader of tomorrow. Mani had a question: what are the lengths and breadths of digitization, especially when we are in an agile culture, and what are the do's and don'ts, if any, much? So like I said, you need to understand what works for your organization. So there are no lengths and breadths of what happens outside. You have to look at inwards. Look at your employees, look at your business stakeholders. We talked about multiplicity of stakeholders. You have to look at your stakeholders and see what are some of the pain points that are either time consuming, either more rigorous, they are more they may or may not be needed today. I think that is the first step. So some things you will actually throw away, some things you need to modify, and some things that you need to digitize. And as you prioritize those some things and say, oh, these are the 3 things that I need to digitize, that forms the benchmark of your digital strategy. There's a lot of learning and there's a lot of unlearning involved in the entire process. Now, Mani says, do we move away from humane approach when we get into digitization? Of course not. That is something that is your responsibility. Like I said, the heart and the conscious of the organizations is inwards. Digitization will impact and your business leaders naturally will have a natural inclination to look outside, because that's the market that they are focusing on and trying to build. I think the role of the CHRO or the HR leader becomes much more pertinent, because he is to focus on the inside and make sure that all the right constituent to deliver to that business strategy in the organization exist, or if they don't, they get developed. If they are not existing as skill, then they either get developed or hired into the organization and get created. Shobha, how can HR restructure the organization effectively to enable digital transformation? I think the first piece is, Shobha, to put across a team. Make sure when you put across that digital transformation team, after you create the buy-in step from your organization leaders, that team not only has HR experts who bring about different skills to the table, it also has people from the business, from CIO, from your marketing team, from your sales teams, from your employee base, and then that constituent of the team from your finance teams, from your procurement teams. And then this is a team which should be tasked by the CEO. This digital agenda should be a CEO's agenda. That's how it should be seen in the organization. And if you're working with a CEO and the CEO and the CHRO work together to drive that as a culture in the organization, then I think the steps will fall all in place. How you restructure the organization, again, like I said, organizations in the future are going to be much more flexible. Organizations in the future will not be so structured as we have seen in the past. So as you break some of these structures, make sure that those are aligned to the needs of what is required. And that's why I said, when you put the whole team, make sure it's not only HR doing this thought process together, because we will only look at it from one point. So you have the right mix of people in the transformation team or the project team to do that. Money, what are the key unlearnings, modern learnings that we should manage this change effectively? Biggest unlearning for me is that HR is very possessive about what they do. HR feels that whatever they do is the best. This is my spreadsheet. I manage it here, and this is the best. And usually, when you give, or if you hear somebody records your answers and sees that, that's something that is happening more and more. So this is something that needs to change going forward. Okay, I think with that we come to almost the end of today's session.
Thank you, sir, for the enlightening session on the importance of human resources in the digital era. A heartfelt thanks for taking out your valuable time for all of us. We now surely know how human resources has a tremendous role to play in this era of cutting-edge technology. I would also like to thank the audiences for their keen interest in joining us today and for making this webinar a success. Xoxoday Enterprise is a technology platform helping organizations manage rewards, incentives, and loyalty programs. We work to develop scalable, secure, distributed, and seamless solutions that help your employees, consumers, and channel partners engage with your brand. With our unparalleled catalog of curated experiences, perks, products, and gift vouchers, Xoxoday creates captivating mechanics to enhance stakeholder engagement. We work with over 800 global clients. Our business portfolio comprises of experiences and activities, enterprise SaaS rewards platform, and brand vouchers. Xoxoday brings to you unique and handpicked collection of experiences and activities across various categories and diverse locations. Take a sneak peek into the realm of enriching and enthralling experiences and explore the unexplored, only with Xoxoday. We'll keep updating you about our upcoming webinars with eminent speakers from the HR and marketing industry. So stay tuned, everybody.